Get out and vote. Yeah, that sounds good, but here's the problem. We have been voting every 2 years, every 4 years, and somehow things just keep getting worse. Your host, Stephanie Kendall, welcomes you to an episode of From Dirt We Grow that everyone needs to hear. So if you are here, go ahead and hit that like button and more importantly, share. Because in 2026, we as the people have a huge decision to make. And it's not about how many of us get out and vote, because as I've said, we've been doing that. Healthcare is still unaffordable. Housing is more out of reach than ever. Wages aren't keeping up. The justice system still punishes poverty. And the people that are making these decisions never seem to feel any of the consequences. So at some point, we have to ask ourselves the uncomfortable question: if voting actually worked, why are we still here? Over the last several weeks and in coming weeks, I have been interviewing candidates, real people, not billionaires, not career politicians, grassroots candidates, people who actually want to fix things. And what I keep hearing from them over and over again is the same story. They're not losing because we don't care. They're not losing because they have bad ideas. They're losing because they are never really given a chance to begin with. The biggest problem in our democracy isn't how many votes we have, it's how the system decides who we're allowed to vote for, which makes it very clear that we don't actually choose our leaders. We choose from a list that's already been approved by money, by party machines, by donors, consultants, corporate interests. And by the time a name shows up on our ballot, the real decisions have already been made for us. We're told we live in a democracy, but it's a democracy where only the wealthy can run, where grassroots candidates are buried in paperwork, where debate stages are locked behind funding thresholds. That's not representation, that's gatekeeping, and it's all legal. And these are rules written by the people already in power to make sure they stay there. Ballot access laws that differ by state, signature requirements designed to exhaust campaigns, media coverage that treats grassroots candidates like they're invisible, and party systems that protect incumbents at all costs. If you don't belong to the machine erases you. And then they want to tell voters these are your options. That's not choice, that's compliance. We're trapped in a two-party system that doesn't represent the people, only the structure. Every election, we're told the same thing. This is one of the most important elections of your lifetime. Every election. So, what that really means is that nothing is ever allowed to change because we're not voting for progress. We're voting to prevent collapse of the system. And that's just not sustainable anymore because eventually we stop believing in the process. That's where a lot of us are at today. We see, we can feel that the system isn't built for us. We're tired of having to pick between the lesser of two evils. We're tired of not having a true voice in the decision of who we feel is best suited to advocate for us. So let's talk about the problems and what needs to change because the system doesn't want you knowing any of this. So, first, valid access laws. Every state sets its own rules for who is allowed to run. And in a lot of places, those rules are designed to block regular people with nearly unreachable qualifiers, such as having to get thousands of signatures, short deadlines, expensive filing fees, different standards depending on whether you're inside a party or outside of it. And what needs to change is simple: the same rules for every candidate, lower signature requirements, transparent deadlines, and modern systems that don't disqualify people over technical nonsense. Next is the primaries. In many states, if you're not registered with a major party, you don't even get to vote in the primary. But the primary is where most elections are actually decided. So that means millions of people are locked out before the general election even happens. Open primaries change that. They allow all voters, independent, Democrat, Republican, open source, to participate. That creates broader choices and weaker party control. When only the base votes, the base decides. Next, ranked choice voting. This one scares the system the most because it breaks the lesser of the two evils trap. With ranked choice voting, you don't have to vote against someone. You can vote for who you actually believe in without throwing your vote away. That opens the door for independent, grassroots candidates and new ideas. You shouldn't have to choose between harm and slightly less harm. You should be able to choose real leadership. Next is money. Money decides who gets taken seriously. If you can't fundraise nonstop, you can't compete, which means working class people rarely get a shot. Publicly funded elections change that. They reduce corporate influence, they amplify small donors, and they allow people to campaign instead of beg. If money decides who can run, then money decides who wins. Next, debates and visibility. Most debates are allowed behind polling numbers and fundraising thresholds, which means if nobody's heard of you, you're not allowed to be heard. And that is backwards. If someone qualifies for the ballot, they deserve to be seen and heard. Voters can't choose what they never get to hear. And finally, state level action. Most of these rules aren't controlled by Washington, they're controlled at the state level. State legislatures, election boards, local laws, that's where real change happens. If you want better choices on the ballot, you have to start paying attention to the rules behind the ballot. So now let's talk about how we actually change who gets on the ballot, because this matters and it's not impossible. So here's what we can actually do to change who gets on the ballot. Because as I said, these rules were created at the state level, which means they can be changed at the state level. Not easily, but legally. So, number one, through state law. Most ballot access rules, primary systems, and election procedures exist because state legislatures passed them. And these change when public pressure becomes consistent and unavoidable. When people keep showing up, when the same issue keeps resurfacing, when media keeps asking why the rule exists, that's how laws change, through sustained pressure, not moments of outrage. Second, through citizen led ballot measures, where it's allowed. In some states, voters can bypass lawmakers entirely and put reforms directly on the ballot. This is how people have changed voting systems, redistricting rules, and election structures before. And these processes are intentionally difficult, but they exist for one reason because voters demanded the power to rewrite rules when lawmakers refuse to. That's direct democracy. Third, through state courts. Many election laws survive not because they're fair, but because no one challenges them. When people bring documented harm into court, unequal treatment, exclusion, arbitrary requirements, courts can and do step in. And again, courts don't respond to outrage, they respond to evidence. Fourth, through who controls elections themselves secretaries of state, election boards, oversight officials. These positions don't get attention, but they interpret and enforce election law. Two states can have similar rules and completely different outcomes depending on who's applying them. That's power most people never see. And finally, through public understanding. Because here's something important the system survives mostly because people don't know how it works. It's made intentionally difficult because complexity protects power. When voters don't understand why candidates disappear or why ballots look limited, they blame each other instead of the structure. And once people understand the rules behind the vote, the conversation changes. And that's why these reforms face so much resistance. Not because they don't work, but because they work too well. They weaken the gatekeepers, they give power back to the voters. And power is the one thing the system never gives up willingly. And if we keep playing by the rules written by corporations, we're going to keep getting corporate outcomes. And no matter how passionately we vote, no matter how loudly we argue online, no matter how divided we become, nothing will fundamentally change until we change how the game itself is played. So today, and all the interviews that I've been highlighting, we're not talking about who you should vote for. We're talking about why so many good candidates never make it to your ballot at all, and why fixing that might be the most important fight we're not having. So now's the time to start. Put pressure on your city officials, your local officials, and let's make the changes. And stay tuned for more interviews. Be sure to subscribe. Listen to the interviews coming up from these grassroots candidates that have a voice and have something to say. Join me right here next week on From Dirt We Grow.